So what questions will we explore today? I'm Martha Schumacher, and I'm glad you asked. Welcome back. I'm grateful you're joining me. Sharing this space with you brings me so much joy. As I sit here in my home office with a cup of tea and my dog Gage under the desk, focused on helping folks like you build stronger connections, I can't help but smile. While this happens naturally when we do things we enjoy, smiling that is, it's also an important part of the active listening process. What I'm talking about is nonverbal cues. How do you show someone that you're engaged in what they're saying, that you're reacting to their thoughts and ideas, that you're emotionally and intellectually present? In some regions of the world, frequent verbal cues are appreciated and sometimes even expected. In New York City, for example, English speakers often speak quickly, talking over one another, finishing each other's thoughts. This is a proven linguistic trait of New York City English that sociolinguists identify throughout the greater metropolitan region. Now, however, when a New Yorker travels to, say, Texas and practices this quick kind of interrupty style of conversation, they may be perceived as rude. In fact, most of the United States has different unwritten rules for conversation, which involve allowing space between thoughts and more direct passings of the proverbial talking stick. This becomes even more true when traveling to different countries and various regions within those countries across the globe. So how do we express our attentiveness while in conversation without constant verbal affirmations? We all do these things naturally, sure, but again, when practicing active listening, it's really important to be even more thoughtful and intentional. As you'll hear in my upcoming chat with today's terrific guest, head nodding happens to be one of the main techniques we can employ. Posture and body language are also extremely important. And guess what? Focusing on body language happens to be one of the 7 key elements of effective active listening. You can lean forward to show interest and keep your arms and legs uncrossed and sit in an open position, as this indicates that you're open and receptive, expressing vulnerability. It may seem a little unnatural at first, but think of it like sign language. You use a physical gesture to communicate an idea in order to allow your conversation partner to hold the talking stick for as long as they need. And of course, to bring it back to my initial point, always smile when it's appropriate. It's equally important to show concern when your conversation partner is voicing worries. You can furrow your brow, frown, or shake your head. This is the act of mirroring your conversation partner's expressions, and it's a crucial communication device. Because while we may have different regional conversation styles, or even speak different languages, we're all human, ultimately. Most people just want to feel that they've communicated their ideas, and seeing their feelings reflected in another human's expressions is a universal comfort. In fact, remembering the human aspect of all of our interactions is at the core of today's episode. This brings us to today's queries. The first one is from our fabulous guest, Tammy Zonker, who I'll introduce shortly. Tammy asks, how do we create an organizational culture that is more human-centered? Stating an explicit goal within a question, like Tammy does here, while incorporating the word we, signals that you want to collaborate with your conversation partner. This not only leads to a conversation, it deepens your partnership. Then my question is, what is the biggest challenge in your job day to day? Follow-up questions that provide people with the ability to express frustrations are key, and we also get into that here. Sometimes solution building has to start with being honest about the negative aspects of a system, and allowing folks space to unpack that is key. Also notice that I use the word challenge as opposed to conflict or struggle, both of which are synonyms for challenge, though they are inherently less optimistic. A challenge is something we can overcome with the right ideas and the right work. So hope is deliberately baked into this query. Our listener question this episode comes from Lacey Slay of the Detroit NGO Economic Security Project. She asks, What is the number one trait leaders need to be successful? Of course, asking for a number one or a favorite often leads to listing a number two or three, etc., and that's to be expected. But asking for that top trait helps focus your conversation partner's response on what they think is the absolute most important thing and why others are secondary. So, let's dive into our episode about fostering trust and leading with curiosity and integrity, and more, including a chance to win a copy of Tammy's new book, here on Glad You Asked. Welcome to Glad You Asked, a show about how active listening can help you build stronger connections with folks in your life, personally and professionally. I'm Martha Schumacher, and I've spent my career asking leaders, funders, donors, and community members thoughtful questions to help find the real reasons behind why they do what they do. And when you pursue these deeper connections, you ultimately arrive at the heart of what really matters, establishing trust. On each episode of Glad You Asked, we'll explore 3 questions, one from our guest, one from a listener, and one from me. During a conversation with mission-driven leaders, we'll test how each question, each compelling prompt, makes active listening possible and deepens our relationships. Afterwards, we'll take a look at how effective our questions were in guiding a meaningful conversation and leave you with a call to action so you can use these questions in your own work and life. Now, let's meet our guest. All right, folks. Well, Tammy Zonker, she is the founder and the president of Fundraising Transformed. She's the host of the Intentional Fundraiser podcast. She's a mission-centric fundraising leader with a big heart and an even bigger brain. Tammy recently authored Calling All Heroes, combining the best of donor-centered and community-centered fundraising for greater impact. It's fantastic. Stay tuned to get your own copy gratis. So, as we do on each episode, today we'll be talking about 3 questions for various audiences that are effective in building trust and making deeper connections. The first question will be from Tammy, the second from me, and then the third from a listener. Yay! With that, Tammy, welcome to Glad You Asked.
Thank you, Martha. I'm so honored and thrilled to be your guest, and I'm so glad you asked me onto the podcast.
Good job. Well, the honor is all mine. Just thrilled. How are you today, Tammy?
I'm doing pretty well, right? There's a lot going on in the world, but I'm staying focused.
I love that. You're one of my inspirations. And speaking of heroes and sheroes and theros, you're definitely in that category for me. So your focus and your ability to keep moving forward for all the right reasons, right? For the reasons we're doing what we do every day is truly an inspiration. So thank you for that. So I'd love to dive in with your question first. Let's take a look at it. And just to kind of give folks a reminder, what we do with these questions is we do kind of 2 things with each of the 3 questions. One is, how do we, but especially how does my guest, that would be Tammy today, feel about each of these questions kind of for themselves? And then, of course, we put it out from the standpoint of what audiences do we think would be good audiences to talk with about this question, to kind of pose that question to. So let's start first with your question.
So my question is, how do we create organizational culture that's more human-centered?
Wow.
Human-centered, which is, that's a drum I've been beating for a while now.
That's right. And it's a really crucial centerpiece of your book, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would I answer the question? So first, I would level set, like, what is organizational culture traditionally? And my understanding, my belief is that it is a set of values, beliefs, and behavioral norms or unspoken rules that guide how we inside our organizations how we make decisions, how we think, how we act, how we relate to one another, especially when no one is looking. Right?
And then when you think about, I mean, clearly for your company, for your business, also I'd be curious to know about the times that you've worked both with and within NGOs and kind of what that's looked like.
Yeah. So let me distinguish, because we've got that traditional definition of organizational culture.
Yes.
And then there's this human-centered organizational culture, which I believe is one that is centered on honoring dignity and motivation and the lived experience of every single person connected to the mission. So that's, of course, leadership. It's, staff at large, the rank and file. It's board. It's volunteers. Right? Culture isn't just about the org chart and those people, but it's like the 360, like everyone that engages, including those who are participating in services. Of course, our communities. So what is the human-centeredness and the culture that every one of those constituents, or if you will, or those community members that they experience? And do they experience feeling respected and feeling dignified and honored and listened to, right? And I know that is one of your real passion points, Martha, and that is that deep listening, right? Empathetic, deep listening for understanding. And so my experience, I've had, across the board. I spent the first several years of my career in, big corporate work in a sales capacity with the computer consulting division of Xerox. And I spent some time in the IBM dealer network. And, those cultures were very, very much centered on the sales, the revenue, the outputs, and of course, good customer service. There are, of course, some similarities to fundraising. Sales and fundraising are very different, but yet making certain that, we get that balance between satisfaction, donor satisfaction, customer satisfaction. But in a human-centered culture, we're interested in more than just the donor's experience or the customer's experience. It's the 360 experience, as I said. And so I've been in with organizations that have a very human-centered culture, and I've been in more organizations that don't.
That have not. That's right. We tend to learn as much, if not more, from the organizations and, for that matter, the leaders, right, that we really don't want to emulate. And so we learn what are the things we know that we as leaders and even just as colleagues to whomever, right, don't want to replicate. But I'm actually I'm thrilled to hear that you've had some very positive experiences.
Yeah, it's true. I have. And honestly, those have been inside smaller organizations. Less bureaucracy, more kind of family feeling kinds of organizations.
Yeah.
And that's not to generalize, because I'm sure there are some very large organizations that have a more human-centered, familial, respectful kind of culture. And I'm sure there are many small organizations that do not. So we can't generalize.
That's right.
I do think that we need to be very intentional about how we contribute to the culture within our own organizations. Because ultimately, we're part of what makes that culture. Every single person contributes to that cultural dynamic.
That's right. And I just wanted to bring you back to the org chart, the good old org chart. Because I think that is such a great example of the way, and again, per your book, right, the way things kind of historically were done is it's all about the org chart and it's all about the job description. And frankly, speaking of job descriptions, the good old other duties as assigned, which seems to just end up putting us in a situation, at least potentially, where there's no end to what we have to get done. And that type of historically adhered to way of, leading an organization or even being a part of an organization, I hope is somewhat going the way of the dodo. The human-centered idea to me is exactly where we need to be. And clearly we still have a ways to go on getting there, not just in the social impact sector, but in every sector. And I really love, too, you giving the example of your early days, right? In the for-profit sector and kind of what that looked like, because you mentioned two companies that have historically been two of the largest in the world. So I bet you kind of saw it all there as well.
It is true. And again, there were some really wonderful things. I'm grateful for those experiences.
Yes.
And to your point, sometimes the best teachers in life teach us what we don't want.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And frankly, when I was there, it was the good old GE Jack Welch era. I mean, not that I want to date myself, but I'm dating myself. And
it's all good.
It was command and control. That was the leadership style.
Yes.
Versus the empathetic leader.
Yes.
The human-centered leader that values everyone's point of view and experience. And not that we can always do what everyone wants us to do, but we need to hear their lived experience, honor it, and determine how does that impact our move forward? How does it impact, in this case, our culture?
That's right. And you mentioned listening again earlier. And of course, that is what this pod is really about. And so I appreciate that, because empathy is actually of the 7 core elements. And I'm kind of slowly but surely letting folks know all 7, but I'm not going to do it all in one fell swoop. But I will say this is not the first time already on this podcast that empathy has come up, because it is arguably the most important element of being a good active listener, and to your point, of being an empathetic leader. So what about now with this question, how do we create an organizational culture that is more human-centered? Clearly, I think that's a great question for CEOs. What do you think about putting that question out to others, and what are some good audiences for that?
Well, I think every constituent in our organization is an important audience for that. To your point, executive leadership and board, absolutely. That deep listening, that empathetic listening, which means listening to stories, listening to fears, listening to ideas, creating psychological safe places for everyone to ask questions and to understand. So certainly, again, within the employee ranks, in the community, with donors, with volunteers, with those people who are participating in programs. And the truth is, in my opinion, Martha, and I'm interested in your opinion about this too, I think we are really good. Most organizations are really good at this empathetic listening with our major donors.
Amen, my friend.
So we know how to do it. But we don't necessarily listen to other donors who are giving at different gift values. We don't necessarily listen to our frontline employees in that same manner, to our volunteers, to the people who, again, are participating in the programs. We know how to do it, but we only prioritize and do it with intention within a very small segment of our community.
I am just nodding my head over and over and over here. Could not be more on the same page with you. I don't know, Tammy, if you over the years, I know that when I was newer to fundraising, I did have this wonderful boss who actually very early on said to me, you know how you see the average fundraiser treating their major donors? That's how we need to be treating everyone, but especially, and I loved that she said this, especially our staff. And to your point, particularly the frontline staff, or actually another way to think about it, because, there's all this terminology around frontline, back office, whatever, a lot of the folks who aren't on the front lines, who have some of the most challenging kind of day-to-day jobs, they too, right, are equal. It's equally important, sometimes maybe even more important, to make sure we're also treating them as the average fundraiser tends to treat major donors. So I love that. Really resonates with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that leader that said that to you early on in your fundraising career, wow, was she ahead of her
Yes.
time?
Yes. I completely agree because I don't really remember at that point in time and what was kind of happening in our profession. I don't remember really hearing that discussion much, if at all. So yeah, I feel like that was a massive gift, and it's one I think about that almost every day, to be honest. So
Yeah.
wonderful. Should we move to the next question? Are we ready?
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay. All right.
I am.
So the question that I'm bringing to the table today is, what is the biggest challenge in your job day to day? I think anyone who's working could be asked that question. However, what I'd love for us to do a little bit today, Tammy, is to think about that in the context. I'm going to bring it back again to your book around all fundraisers and what their challenges are day to day. I think there are just so many different ways you've talked with fundraisers about this question. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll share what the biggest challenge I face in my work as an entrepreneur that provides training and support to fundraisers and nonprofit organizations. And quite frankly, I think it's very similar to what I experienced as a fundraising practitioner for those many years when I was, a major gift officer, a director of development, and eventually a chief philanthropy officer. And that is how to prioritize what you really should be focused on, right? There is such a volume of things to do, but there's also a distinction between what you can do and what you should do. And I think that especially inside organizations, and I suspect many of your listeners are nodding right now as well, I think once you have demonstrated your capabilities to seemingly make magic happen, you become the go-to person for a whole host of opportunities to collaborate. And we love collaboration, don't get me wrong. But again, back to the earlier point, there are things that you really need to prioritize and focus on that are needle-moving activities versus, things that you should be doing versus things that you can do. And I think that's the biggest challenge that I face now in my day-to-day work. And certainly it was one of the biggest challenges I faced as a chief philanthropy officer, was staying focused on the big rocks, if you will, the things that were really going to be needle-moving activities. And what were the things that would be interesting, which would be, make someone happy, but were not a strategic priority. So how do you strike that balance between staying focused on the most important things that do move the needle, that are going to produce the results that are aligned with the strategic plan, with the vision, that are human-centered, that meet the needs, the most important needs of the greatest? And I'm thinking specifically of, yes, colleagues, but, in our case, funding programs that our communities are counting on us for, right? To keep equipping them to move forward versus things that might placate a board member or any number of those kinds of examples.
Yes. And I do think a lot of people are nodding because it's a combination, right, of the capability piece and showing that capability and people realizing, oh, I can go to Tammy because she's on top of things. She knows how to get things done. She's a great multitasker, which maybe you should come back at some point. We can talk about how multitasking isn't real, but that's maybe a topic for another day.
Yes.
But I also think what I'm hearing is that often folks don't necessarily realize, who are not full-time fundraisers, that our job really is actually to be the service provider, so to speak, to the rest of the organization, right? That's usually how this works. And so that's great. And yet, to your point about setting priorities, clearly being able to kind of make those tough decisions, on a regular basis, sometimes daily basis about, I think your example about a board member is maybe one of the best that anyone listening can relate to. And how you have that conversation. So we're back to the active listening piece around how do you talk with that board member about why, for example, maybe this isn't the moment for that, or redirect them to something that would make more sense overall to reach the objectives that you're trying to reach in your role, right? I think that's often some of our biggest challenges. And that's where, frankly, some of these prompts, some of these questions to get that conversation going with the board member or your CEO or your program colleague. I love over the years, I've had so many great ideas come, to me as a fundraiser from some of my colleagues who are in program.
Yes.
And you really do, to your point, it's discernment and it's making some tough calls sometimes around how you really should be spending your time and what's going to benefit the organization most, right?
Mm-hmm. That speaks to our ability to have those courageous conversations and to lean into traditional power dynamics so that we can have that empathetic, honoring, respectful conversation about what best serves the organization in this moment.
100%. And I think we're back again to this, another, well, it's in your title, right? It's kind of some of the, I think, healthy push and pull between the donor-centered versus community-centered piece, because one of the things, right, that can happen is you can have, back again to maybe a board member wanting to do something or wanting to kind of take things in a direction that you'll need to have a kind of a crucial conversation, so to speak, with them. So asking this question about what is the biggest challenge in your job day to day, one of my favorite things about asking fundraisers that question, I'd be curious to hear what you think, and then we can move to the listener question, is those follow-up questions, such as, and I'll just throw a couple out and happy, obviously, for you to weigh in with others, is, thank you for sharing that with me. What can I do to help? Might be one of the ways that you respond to that, or that does sound challenging. What can we do together to address this issue? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in complete agreement that part of that, hand in hand with active listening are asking thoughtful, probing questions. That's so interesting, for example. That's so interesting. Tell me more about that. How did you come up with that idea? Or what problem are we solving with that approach? Help me understand. I'm very interested in that. Right? Not in a defensive kind of way, but in a curious, open kind of way. How long have you felt that way? Have you always felt that way?
Yes.
And so they begin unpacking maybe a moment even when they came to that recommendation of what you should do or we should do. So yeah, I think that the dialogue is key. And even though your inner voice may be saying, oh, hell no.
Put it out there, Tammy.
You have to have that, okay, Tammy, be open. Suspend your opinion to authentically learn more. Because this is obviously, let's say it's a board member, or it's a community leader, or it's the program director, or a program manager, a clinician. And they're smart people. They're passionate about this cause, or they wouldn't even be bringing this idea forward. So out of dignity and respect, really understand their point of view before I jump to my opinion, my perspective, because what they share might change what I'm thinking.
That's right. I love that you use the word curiosity. And then I think we're also back to the humility of the moment,
Yeah.
which is to be humble versus defensive. So I liked you saying that, like, not from a defensive posture, not from a defensive standpoint, if if we can handle it, because sometimes that's hard. Okay, well, my goodness. What do you think? Anything else on this piece? Because it's so crucially important that people who are fundraising every day, be heard and understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even maybe some of your listeners aren't frontline fundraisers, to your earlier point, but
Yes.
your back end support staff or prospect researchers, like you're doing the work. And so when I'm talking to you, operational fundraising operations folks who I love and adore and respect. So when the gift officer comes and says, I need this report, right? It could be like, I'm in the middle of month end reconciliation. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it could be,
Yes.
like, okay, pause. Tell me, what is it that you need to do with that data? What's the timeline? Like, again, it's that curiosity. We're
Yes.
collaborating. We both care about this. Let's figure it out together. And to me, it almost always goes back to asking great questions and listening to the answers and then coming to the next best steps together. And maybe the next best step is, let's pause.
That's right. And boy, is that a great example, right? Because often there are different languages almost being spoken
Yeah.
in those
Yes.
moments, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect, Tammy. I can't add anything more to that. It's so good and so it feels very spot on to me. So our final question comes from actually a dear friend and colleague whose name is Lacey Slay. And Lacey, I still believe that your name sounds like one of the best superheroes in the world. I think Lacey Slay should be the name of the next Marvel superhero. Okay, I digress. Anyway, Lacey is the Associate Director of Development at the Economic Security Project, and that's in your beloved Detroit, Tammy.
Yes.
Uh,
313.
Yes. So for folks in all roles across all sectors, I'm thinking this is a great one to ask. Lacey asks, what is the number one trait leaders need to be successful?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first I want to say integrity is a given, right? So let's just make an assumption that integrity
Yeah.
is in place. Now my answer is, I really believe that curiosity, and of course the listening that goes hand in hand with it, but the curiosity is one of the most underrated, most powerful, most underutilized skills that a leader can possess. So I feel like curiosity fuels better decisions. It builds trust and psychological safety. It strengthens relationships. It fosters collaboration. Like, there's just so many good things about curiosity, both for us who are asking the questions and learning, and those who are being asked the questions, like in that dialogue, in that full circle communication. I think curiosity is the answer.
And do you also think that even just showing curiosity, right? Even just that in and of itself kind of ups the level of respect, the level of human-centered communication between two people. You get there pretty quickly, even just by showing curiosity, more or less truly being curious, but just even having someone who maybe has not felt like anyone, kind of even cares about them day to day.
Yeah,
It goes a long way right there.
it absolutely does. It says, I value your point of view, your lived experience. I value that and believe that you might see something I don't see. I want to see what you see. Help me understand. So it's absolutely a show of respect. It honors them. People feel more seen, and this, like, almost, I don't want it to be the cliche, like seen, heard, and understood, but it's a real thing, and people need, especially, I mean, it's a heavy lift in the social impact sector.
It is a heavy lift. So, boy, Tammy, I do think that curiosity is crucial. And again, I think it's that combination of both truly being curious and then also just showing that you care about this person across from you. And I really appreciate that you chose that. I think, coming back to empathy, that if I had to choose, that would be mine. Now, I also agree, though, and really appreciate what you said about integrity, right? We want to say right up front that that's got to be there, period, because then the rest of it's not going to work anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the leadership challenge, right? It's not one thing. It's a combination of things. And so I love that Lacey asked that question, because it really illuminates that there are a lot of different answers and they're all right.
There you go. Indeed. And so could you ever see yourself kind of with, it could be a colleague, a client, whomever, but asking folks that question? And what's interesting to me is you could ask someone, for example, who is the CEO, maybe it's the board chair, et cetera. But I think you can really ask anyone that question and get an interesting perspective, right?
Yeah, I think that is very true. I think that it's a nod to the person's beliefs and values, which again are all centric to relationship building, is understanding the beliefs and values of whomever we are building a relationship with or seeking to collaborate with, so that we can find, like, where are we aligned primarily? Is it the empathy for those that we serve? Maybe it's someone who has a lived experience of, receiving cancer treatment from your hospital, right? I mean, just trying to find those aligned beliefs and values. I think it's a completely wonderful discovery question. I can't think of a scenario where it wouldn't apply. Community leaders, board members, volunteers, donors, colleagues, we all have an opportunity to be leaders, regardless. And every day there's an opportunity to lead. And so I suspect everyone has an answer to that question, or could come up with an answer if they were given a moment to really reflect on it.
That's right. And maybe it would make them kind of think more about, well, how would I respond to that question and why? All right. A+ Lacey Slay on Lacey. That. And I love, you're right. It's an excellent discovery question. Really good point. Tammy, I have so enjoyed our time together today. I remain incredibly grateful for you coming on. Glad you asked. Any last thoughts?
Oh, well, thanks for having me on, Martha. Anytime I have a chance to talk with you, sign me up.
Right back really. At you. Yeah. That is lovely. And that means a lot to me. Just for folks listening, Tammy and I think, have had many years of kind of mutual admiration society, yet we've really more fully connected over the last couple of years. And that has been such a joy and gift for me in my life, to get to know you better and to connect more meaningfully with you. So this was another great excuse to do that.
Yeah. Yes, same. I think, Martha, if there's any closing thoughts, in these challenging times, these uncertain times, which again, I think anyone can, there's always a challenge. There's always uncertainty. It's about degree. But I would just say, keep on going. The world needs the work that you do, the mission that you have committed yourself to. We need that work to continue. So keep going.
Hallelujah, and right back at you. Again, Tammy, many thanks.
My pleasure.
Wow, it is always so energizing and exciting to chat with Tammy, and always provides a wellspring of insights into meaningful human interaction. So Tammy's question, how do we create organizational culture that's more human-centered is at the core of everything she does. I noticed how, after each question, Tammy's always brought it back to humanity. Now, this notion shouldn't be radical, and it shouldn't be disruptive, but as Tammy points out, in the sales-centered culture of so many organizations, humanity often takes a second seat to sales. Therefore, even pushing for humanity can become radical. Everywhere we look nowadays, we see advertisements and metrics. Buy this product, watch this show, invest in this form of digital currency, bet on this sport. And then, how many likes did your post get? How can you profit off of your hobby? Are you being efficient enough? What have you accomplished today? These ads and metrics, while useful in some contexts, are truly distractions from our humanity when they're constantly running. And I'm grateful to have a space here, I'm glad you asked, where we can bring the human back into the equation, even prioritize it, and have candid conversations. As I apply Tammy's question to my everyday life and my personal relationships, my answer comes back to listening. Asking the right questions and listening closely to the response is how each of us can create a space that's more human-centered and that lets the folks around us be themselves, which inevitably leads to building trust. I also want to add something about my time at Defenders of Wildlife. They listened to us about recruitment around giving folks more paid annual leave. How? They went from offering folks 2 weeks to 4. In other words, over the first few years I was at Defenders, staff was able to lobby so that we could give staff 4 weeks the minute they walked in the door. That is really powerful stuff, and as you might imagine, a pretty darn compelling recruitment tool for having the best possible people come and be part of our team at Defenders. I find myself reflecting on the conversation spurred by my question, what is the biggest challenge in your job day to day, in a personal context as well? We face challenges every day in our personal relationships with friends, family members, and neighbors, with financial planning, time management, even routine chores. When things get overwhelming, identifying the biggest challenge in any one of these areas can help. Again, the word challenge is very intentional because challenges can be overcome. Identifying the challenge is a huge step, and once you've identified it, the challenge becomes conquerable. You can truly plan a way forward, a path toward a solution. So I've asked so many people about their biggest day-to-day challenge over the years, and folks listening might be surprised to learn that by and large, the answer from fundraisers has not been about the challenge of being able to raise enough money. Much more often, it's been about creating a culture where the fundraiser or fundraisers feel less alone. You'll note that I didn't say creating a culture of philanthropy because I think that's a concept that is becoming more fraught. For example, like the organizations who expect every one of their staff members to make a gift to the organization, regardless of their personal financial circumstances or how much they're being compensated by the organization. I'm talking about creating a culture where the responsibility of making others aware of your mission and the ways they can become involved is considered a shared commitment that includes everyone wearing an organizational ambassador hat. And this is for staff, board, other volunteers, etc. Tammy also added some great follow-up prompts to this question that I'd like to highlight here. That's so interesting. Tell me more about that. How did you come up with that idea? What problem are we solving with that approach? Help me understand. I'm very interested in that. How long have you felt that way? Have you always felt that way? Each of these are like the and why that we've talked about in previous episodes and are great examples of how to continue engaging with folks. One word of caution, though. If you're asking these questions performatively, not sincerely, people will know. Enough said. The third and final question today, what is the number one trait leaders need to be successful, from Lacey, can also be applied to everyday life. As we've discussed in previous episodes, just replace the word leaders with parents or teachers or coaches or even humans. I find that no matter what role I slot into this question, Tammy's response is always relevant. Integrity and curiosity are key traits for successful leaders. Asking folks in your life this question can be so helpful, reveal their values, and lead to meaningful conversations that build trust. And hey, by the way, one thing I didn't say when I was chatting with Tammy is that I believe everyone's definition of successful, again, remember, the question is, what is the number one traits leader need to be successful? Everyone's definition of that is different, and that's as it should be. I wanted to also add that my answer to this question is to be the best possible active listener. I know, you're surprised, aren't you? This is often called a soft skill that, in my opinion, is not soft at all. In fact, it's what I like to refer to as an essential skill. Early in my nonprofit career, I had a boss who was especially gifted at listening, and my favorite thing about her was her interconnected empathy, transparency, and vulnerability. What I mean by that is that, for example, there was more than one time when she let the team know that she was trying to address a particular organizational policy issue, but it was taking longer than she had anticipated. She made sure we felt seen and heard in terms of our frustration, and she let us know that she would do everything in her power to advocate for us. Further, she shared that whichever way the decision ultimately went, she was here for us and would be upfront about what was happening regardless of the outcome. Okay, so now I want a few lucky listeners to come away with even more of Tammy's brilliant fodder. That's right, we're doing another book giveaway for 5 lucky listeners who subscribe to the Glad You Asked Patreon community, where I'll be sharing deeper insights about active listening. Head over to patreon.com/gladyouasked and subscribe for a chance to win. And now for this week's homework. I can't stop thinking about Lacey's great question. What is the number one trait leaders need to be successful? My challenge to you is to talk with a colleague, a friend, or even a stranger. And yes, introverts, I have faith in you. You can do it. And tweak the question to ask, what is the number one trait humans need to be successful? You'll be showing that you respect their opinion, and you'll come away with new insights and maybe even some great advice. Whatever happens, as ever, I'm confident you'll be glad you asked. Thanks for listening to Glad You Asked, a Hazen Institute for Leadership training podcast. If you enjoy the show, come find me on Patreon for more in-depth content. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. This show is produced by the amazing Patrick and Benjamin Childers of Odd Conduit Media. Please check the show notes for our guest links, today's questions, and more information. A massive heartfelt shout out to my father, Hazen Schumacher, who taught me the power of audio storytelling through his weekly radio show, Jazz Revisited, and to Basil and the Supernaturals, featuring Kevin Thompson and Herbie Hunkley for making original music. If you have a question you'd like me to put out there on our show, send me a message on LinkedIn or send me an email at hello@hazeninc.com. Have you used a question from our show in your life? If so, drop us a line and tell us how it went. You can also learn more about my work at hazeninc.com. Tune in next time to keep exploring active listening on another episode of Glad You Asked.